Hooray. Thank you all for being here. And we are just so excited to have Jennifer Gasner. We picked someone local, and I want to just give a couple of things to expect for tonight. First, Jennifer's going to introduce herself. Toni is going to introduce herself. And then Jennifer has planned a short book talk in terms of reading a portion of her book. What we will be doing is doing a random wheel generator drawing because 4 of you are going to receive a copy in the mail of the book tonight. So if you're picked, not everybody will go home a winner, but hopefully some of you will. And then what we really like to encourage is more of a free flow to the conversation. If you're comfortable, raising your hand, unmuting, participating, asking questions, giving feedback, but also you can use the chat. And so we just don't want to save everything to the last 10 minutes. We want it to be, involved. And any other points of questioning? Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Maura, and thank you for having me. I'm really excited about doing this. I just want to say a little bit about myself. So I grew up in Wisconsin. That's actually where almost all of my book takes place, in Wisconsin. And it happens also during 1990s. Or during the 1990s. So for anyone who's a Gen Xer, it might be really, really fun to read and hear about different music and things like that. I moved to San Diego in 2001. My parents thought I'd be here pretty much 6 months and come home, but I stayed. And so this book, it took me about 9 years to write, on and off. And I'm just really excited to talk to you more about it. It's really about my journey from fear to acceptance after I was diagnosed with a progressive disability at 17. So, and I'm really happy again to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So hi, everyone. I'm Toni Saia. Happy Disability Pride Month. I don't think it really matters what I do. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just excited to be here. I am a professor at SDSU, and I just am joining to kind of facilitate some conversation and discussion with a great author, but also a dear friend of mine. So we're hoping that it functions more like just a cool combo. And thanks so much for spending your Thursday night with us. I had to think about what day it was. So really excited to be a part of this conversation. I've been lucky enough to been part of Jen's journey in terms of I've come in the tail end of when she was closing out some of the book. So we've had a lot of discussions before it came to full fruition. But yeah, just really excited to engage in combo and please do what you need to do to fully participate in today's event, and we'll hopefully get to some good combo.
Great. Well, should I go ahead and start with a little reading, or?
Yeah, Jen, real quick though, I just want to make sure. Justin, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, I'm gonna let you know if who doing host the Zoom right now. You guys can I think she control this. She can pick to put the 2 people on there, is that I went to the People First conference and we had trolled, somebody trolled the People First conference. You can just make it two people. They're called pick.
Oh, yeah, pinned.
Oh, yeah.
So Justin, I have pinned Jennifer and Toni on mine. So on mine, they look like they're big and in the middle, but I'm not sure if that's shared by all of you.
So do you want to try this spotlighting both of us?
Sure, let's try that. Thank you. Oh, so I have Jennifer spotlighted.
Mm-hmm. Now you're
And-
real big, Jen. Okay, I
and
think that
now?
might work.
Everybody good? Sorry. We'll
Yeah.
edit that part out too.
No
Okay,
problem.
Jennifer,
You know
we are
what?
on.
No, we won't edit it out because this is the beauty of prioritizing access and flexibility.
Accessibility.
So no, I think that this is what should happen. And so, yeah, without further ado, Jen, take it away. Really excited to hear the section you selected.
All right, so I'm going to read a part that takes place about a year after I have been diagnosed with a rare disease called Friedreich's ataxia. Ataxia is basically loss of balance and coordination. So again, I am still walking at this point. There's nothing noticeable really about what's going on with me. But this is my shortly after my 18th birthday. I was dumbfounded why my parents never talked about Friedreich's ataxia. I took part of the responsibility. Why would they want to bring up a subject for which I had blamed them? Their avoidance made sense from that perspective. And my Kindle just moved away. All right. Sorry, let me. So, were they as clueless as I was about how FA would change our lives? Did they feel powerless like I did? Shouldn't we make some sort of plan? I needed them to acknowledge FA, to say something so I wouldn't feel so alone. So I got up the courage to ask my dad. I looked at Dad sitting across from me and asked, "Why don't we talk about Friedrichs?" "What's the point?" Dad said. "It is what it is. The doctors say nothing can be done. Talking about it isn't going to make it go away." His voice had grown louder with each word. He seemed angry. I looked to my right at Mom, hoping for a calm response. She cried. "So now we're bad parents." My stomach churned. I didn't say that. I turned to my dad like I watched a tennis match. He might help before Mom spiraled out of control. But he wouldn't even look at me. "You don't need to. I'm a bad mother." I switched sides again to see Mom's beet red skin and tears as she stood from the table. She ran out of the room. Dad looked at me with a disappointed scowl, like he'd caught me cheating or something. I'm going to check on her, he said as he left me alone with a remorseful heart. I got the hint. It wasn't a subject my parents were willing to discuss, and I shouldn't bring FA up again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So can I ask a question?
Sure.
So now that you're older, do you interpret their reaction differently than you might have when you were 18?
Oh, definitely. I think both just because of age and experience and distance from the event, and also through the process of writing the book, I really developed a sense of compassion for my parents because they really had no idea what to do, and based on the way they were raised, their communication skills weren't that great either. So I look at it more as, you know, they just didn't know what to do.
And they probably were, I would imagine they were labeling themselves as not good parents. You know, it wasn't that you were doing that. I think they probably, I'm just projecting, but I can
Yes.
imagine that you feel as a parent so responsible and helpless. And you're right, that generation didn't really talk about things that were close to the heart. So it would be,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the one thing I also did not mention about Friedrich's is that it's genetic. You know, so that there's a scene earlier in the book where I do blame my mother, and I'm like, thank you for doing this to me, you know, which was horrible.
Yeah, but
But
you were a kid.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I wanna add a couple of things. I think so I want to be careful to say, like, of course, we're not here to shame parents and their reactions, but I also think the unwillingness to discuss it puts Jen and puts disabled people in really difficult situations in which they're negotiating their own experience. And silence sends a lot of messages about how we feel about disability, right? And so I think and I think it's okay that you also had the experience of blame. I think you're going through grief as well. And it as just as it's okay for parents to go through these processes, it's also okay for the person with the lived experience to kind of honor how they're feeling in the moment.
And if something also, like, there were things my mom didn't tell me that I appreciated, because I find out later that I'm supposed to die by the time I'm 25 and all this stuff, which, you know, I was 17 or 16 when I found that out. So that was very scary, but the doctor had told my mom that, but she never told me. So there, like, she did the right thing. I feel like in that sense for not telling me that. But there were other things I wish she would have been more open to talk about. And honestly, too, I didn't have the skill to tell her everything either.
Of course, nowadays you would Google it.
Yeah, or you'd ask ChatGPT to tell you.
Yeah, but see, that's what's interesting. I wanna pinpoint that point of Google, because when you Google things about disability, unless your Google is very skewed like mine, because I do a lot of disability culture and pride work, right? A lot of the things that come up around disability are usually the negative things, right? Or usually the worst case scenarios. I'm not saying that those are not a reality, but I also think those are the messages that parents receive very early on in the diagnostic process, whether it's a child, whether it's an adult, whether I think that we receive a lot of like we're being sold a lie that disability is a bad thing, right? It doesn't mean that there's not going to be hardships and different things, but I think I get afraid when people say Google about disability, because I'm like, what are you going to find? And a lot of it is not written from a non-disabled, like from a disabled person's perspective. It's a lot of non-disabled people reporting about info. And so, I mean, yes, Google is a wonderful resource, but I also think around disability, we're missing the boat on selling like authentic narratives.
One of the things oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna, like, this is kind of an awesome opportunity to, like, in reflecting, I'm sitting here as a parent with somebody walking in, interrupting, and thinking, like, what are some ways that we could model for other parents having these kinds of conversations, or being open to having these conversations, especially given that, I mean, I certainly was raised by parents who, like, whatever it is, we're just going to soldier on, we're going to have a wooden spoon, we're going to keep going, and very Midwestern, and like, just, I think you I think you say something about, like, my good Lutheran roots, like thanking the doctor for giving you a spinal tap was one of the things that, like, struck me as very, very, solid Wisconsin behavior. And so, are there things that you would, with your experiences, recommend to family members who are trying to be available for conversations that they really are maybe not well equipped from their models to have?
Well, I think it's and Toni, feel free to jump in here, but I think it's a matter of getting comfortable with the word disability, and not necessarily thinking it's a negative thing, and really trying to understand its history, its culture, and things like that, and try to approach it not like, hey, this is what's wrong with you, not necessarily use everything in the medical terminology, but also I just had a thought pop into my mind and now I can't remember. So Toni, oh, I know what it was. So I think a lot of issues with disability and it seeming to be a bad word is because it often comes with low expectations. And I think that's also a critical part is to realize that, you need to start assuming people can do things, not assuming they can't. Tony?
Yeah. I have to try to I could speak on this for 3 hours, but I have to curb my responses here. I think I think one of the things is also being mindful. I think for parents, right? Because you asked a question like, what can parents do? I think in the initial stages, parents get a lot of resources, but questioning what, like, who's in charge of those resources? Are they authentic perspectives of disabled people? Seeking that out, right? I always joke and say I didn't come out of the womb with a disability culture book, and neither did my parents. But when I was prepared to have those conversations, my parents really embraced that and did their own homework, right? And so it wasn't just me educating them on as I was finding my own identity, like they also did their own homework. And I'm not suggesting that parents should, sit home and Google everything, but I think just the same way you would prepare for other conversations, I think this is a major thing going on in your life, and I think it needs, dedicated time. And I think based on the book and the parents' response to Jen wanting to talk about it, they seem like unprepared to talk about it at all, right? It's kind of like it happened and now they never want to talk about it again while Jen is negotiating this life experience, right? And so which can be seen as unsupportive, right? Even though that's not the intention, it's like the total neglect of willingness to have the conversation. So even if they didn't know what to say, they could have asked Jen how she felt about it. Tell me more about it. How's it go? Like, what are you worried about? And maybe it could have been a shared grieving process or a shared, planning process. Instead, it seemed like it was very like up to Jen to, well, never talk about it and go find your own community. And so I think a willingness to have conversations, even if they're uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I don't I don't think there are right ways or wrong. Well, what am I trying to say? It's not a black and white issue. Like there are levels and there's nuance to every situation and what is going on.
Yeah.
So you have to be willing to try, I think.
Yeah. Jen, I wonder if it would be helpful at this point to cite any other experiences that you talk about in the book related to your parents' responses. Just as a, because I mean, I think when we're hearing the isolated, paragraph, it's easy for us to say, do this or do that. But I think that this is something that you continue to go back to.
Yes. So when I was 19, almost 19, my parents had to relocate. And I was actually very excited about that because the house we lived in was 2 stories. There were stairs everywhere. I had to, go upstairs to get to my room, get to a shower, things like that. And I was so excited, like, oh, now they have to get a new house. So I'm gonna suggest, or tell them at least, like, make sure it's a one-story house and things like that. And I was also worried about a big bathroom at the time. And they went ahead and bought a house. I didn't go with them. I was in college. And I trusted them at that point to make it, sorry, to make, sorry, to make the decision. And I went back and saw the house when they were moving in. And it seemed okay in the beginning, but then it wasn't, because they bought a house with a sunken living room. So there were stairs on either side of it, and I had to go through that room to get to my room and the bathroom, or to get outside. So there was no way I could avoid it. And my reaction was, oh, this will be really nice when I start using a wheelchair. So that was another instance where, again, looking back on it, I think it was part of their denial. And it wasn't intentional.
Yeah. I will say though, as a disabled person, it's hard not to internalize that that it's not intentional. I will just say that because it's like, as a wheelchair user, I navigate a lot of spaces where decisions very much feel intentional as a way to gatekeep where I'm meant to be in society. And I mean, I understand the denial piece, right? And I'm not shaming them for having those experiences, but also, you know, we say this a lot in disability spaces, being proactive, right? And I think that, due to their reaction to the whole situation, their ability to be proactive, you know, did a lot more harm to you. Even if it wasn't, it's just like you roll into that house and you get the message that it's not for you. So how could you feel at home or welcome? Right. And it doesn't mean you don't love your parents, but those feelings are very real.
Yes, it definitely made me feel like, oh, I'm not really important. I'm not really a part of this family, you know. So
Were you in a wheelchair at that time? Because I was wondering if maybe they're thinking, well, the doctor said you wouldn't be around after 25, so that's crass. I don't mean to offend, but
No.
I'm wondering if they're thinking, short term, she's not using a wheelchair. This is good for now, and she's not going to be around that long. So, I mean, that's really bad, but
No, it's an understandable question. I had asked the doctor, I read this, does this really mean I'm gonna die at 25? Thank God he gave me the best answer. He said, not necessarily, because FA is different in every person, and you should go ahead with your life as planned. Don't let this stop you from doing anything. So, so I did that, but I was still walking at the time. This was 2 years after my diagnosis. I didn't start using a wheelchair until 26. But I was using a walker by 21, which made that house a nightmare.
Yeah.
I have another idea. I'm Suzanne, and I'm a third friend, and I was gonna be here to listen in, but now I want to jump in. Thinking about Jen's feelings of them not thinking ahead and not planning for her, and then Tony's suggestion that it feels intentional. I wonder about it being so far off people's radar when they're not in the disability world that they might go look at this house and not even consider how much of a problem that is for somebody whose body is different. And I feel that way because so often we've seen people with really good intentions make these really big mistakes where you're like, how could you not realize that? And I think part of it goes to like, who are we spending time with? Whose experience are we sharing? And if we don't have adult friends who are disabled, if we don't have community members that we spend time with, it can be just completely outside of our awareness. And I think that's something that really goes to the heart of like what you make of disability. Like if you're not hanging out with people, you don't have people in your lives on a daily basis, it's saying something about what you value or what you don't value, right? Because disabled people are everywhere. We're everywhere, right? And so if you don't have those close connections to have that experience, I think that's kind of, where we need to start.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and I think too, like, saying that it feels intentional really gets at that impact. It doesn't mean that it is intentional, but there's a difference between intention and impact. And I think sometimes we have to be thinking about, even with the best of intentions, the impact could be, like, so for example, people always tell me, of course you're welcome, Toni, there's a ramp. But I always respond and say, what happens when I get up that ramp? Am I valued? Am I seen and heard as a member of the community or whatever meeting I'm going to? So I think that it's all kind of tied, right? It's like a lack of awareness, a lack of how we make meaning of disabled people's experiences, and the impact of the lived experience. Because I think sometimes in conversations we think about all the other people that are involved, but we're not centering the impact of the person living it. And there's a lot of people that are impacted, but the lived experience and other member is not the same thing, right? So the parental experience and the familial experience of the impact of disability is very different than the lived experience. And so they're both valid and important, but it's important to negotiate and make sure that, we're finding ways to center that experience. So there's some good there's some comments in the chat that I want to make sure we acknowledge. So Amy says, any advice for my beauty pageant coming up this Friday or Saturday? And so if you have any advice about that, I will say I don't know anything about pageants. But Jen, I feel like you've had some experiences in your life. So
Yes. Well, if I may, what pageant are we referring to?
okay. Give Amy
Yeah.
some time.
Yeah, yeah, it's fine.
Really quick, I'm going to pop in and say, Amy, since we're already talking about Amy and your beauty advice question, my magic wheel generator has just picked Amy as the winner of our first
Oh,
drawing
alright,
copy. So
great.
one winner has already been identified. I will put in the chat how to get your copy. We will mail it to you for free. I should say at no cost to you, thanks to my boss, Joyce, with the FRC. Yay! And then while we're waiting, I also want to acknowledge Allison put in the comment. Wouldn't it be great if the medical establishment recognized that they see disability one way and that there are other ways to view disability? That would be
I
great.
guess what I was thinking is if they said that out loud to parents or when they're delivering difficult news, right? That, hey, this isn't the only way. This is the only information. You need to get other information. Like ours is really limited. So
Absolutely.
I didn't put in that part about, and then they like recognized it and then articulated it to people.
Yeah, it would be nice if it would really be nice. I would say that would be nice. That articulation would be nice across the board as a disabled person from medical professionals. Like I just feel like I'm still seeking that out. Like I'm experiencing back pain and then they're like exercise. I'm like this has nothing to do with exercise. Like and so I think it's important to think about that validation or that articulation.
Maybe that's your next book, Jennifer.
Oh,
Dear
yeah.
Doctor.
Yes. Well, doctors in the 90s when I wrote during the time I wrote this book, it was a really different experience. I think, well, I don't really know how different it is now, but back then they were all very like not necessarily afraid of me, but they were very careful about approaching me. And now I don't feel that way around most doctors, but it's interesting looking back on it, like how fragile everyone expected me to be. That just came to mind right now.
The fragile part, I think. So, I mean, you brought up something earlier, Jen, that I want to circle back to of like this balance of like sharing information and like maybe it was great that your mom didn't tell you that, you have by doctor standards, you have a lower life expectancy. But I also think this happens where we then helicopter disabled people and we don't want to like give them access to reality and like we just want to be like, oh, we don't want to tell them anything.
Yes.
We want to shelter them from information. And that's also like that's another extreme. And I really think about one of the things I really benefited from as a disabled person is like my parents were very realistic. It doesn't mean that they were dream killers. It doesn't mean that they didn't support me, but they were realistic and I think that it's important to have high expectations, of course, but it's also important to have realistic conversations, right? That it is going to be difficult for me to get a job, and not it has it's a lot of it's not just about my talents, but that there's ableism in the world, and the unemployment rate of disabled people is high, right? And so if my parents didn't share those things and they didn't share it in that language, but they acknowledged that things were going to be difficult. And I think that that's important. And it's also important to have realistic expectations.
Yes, I'd agree with that. And I was, I was a teenager. I was admittingly very what's the word I'm looking for? I was very resentful whenever people would tell me, "Oh, no, you can't handle this school, or you need to go to a smaller school." So yeah, that can be a little uh difficult at the same time. But
Yeah.
I do. But I also, once again, looking back on it, I realized, yeah, those are good things that they told me that.
Yeah. And like I said, I just shared the job example as an example. Obviously, there are plenty of disabled people that have great jobs, right? And but even to get that job, there's a lot of barriers for disabled people that are in place that a lot of people don't want to acknowledge, right? We just say, you can do anything. And it's like, yes, and we have to acknowledge that there are barriers placed in the environment. So yes, I have what I would call my dream job right now, but the path to my dream job is not the same as my non-disabled peers, right? So I think it's important to acknowledge
Right.
that championing their dreams, but also acknowledging that there are environmental and attitudinal barriers and that are in place. And it doesn't mean that we can't look for ways to reduce those, but acknowledging that.
And yet, and actually, to my mom's credit, she's the one who found the job opening for that, where I ended up working in independent living. She's the one who found that.
Mhm.
Partly because the ad said people with disabilities encouraged to apply. But I don't honestly know that I would have found that without her. Because again, this is the late 90s. So people are still searching in the newspaper for jobs.
One thing I was thinking as you were sharing that is circling back to Suzanne's point, where it's who's in your circle, who's around you. And then I think going back to Toni's point, I mean, that's all kind of woven at this point, but really thinking about like those barriers to being in spaces, restricting those of us who easily move through different kinds of spaces. And so it is screening out who can we get to know. And I'm probably saying this in a terrible way, but I'm just kind of connecting Suzanne's dots and going, that's part of why I think I was less prepared to be a parent of a person with a disability, is just who was I around.
Mm-hmm.
And awareness, but access breeds more awareness, not the other way. And I want to circle back to something though that I saw in the book. I'm from Illinois, so of course when I saw Illinois mentioned, I thought, oh good, Illinois, except that somebody told Jennifer, in Illinois we don't take the ADA seriously.
Yes.
And I went, oh, so discuss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go
Yeah.
ahead, Jay.
Well, again, that was, oh gosh, that was 1998. It was still 8 years after the ADA had passed. And it was somebody who I thought would be in my corner, and that was just super disappointing.
Yeah, and I don't want to be, a negative Nancy here, but I will say that in 2024, I still feel that society doesn't really take the ADA seriously. So as much as, we're jarred reading that, as a disabled person mingling in a world that's not really designed for me, and with a lot of privilege, right? I would say that there's a lot of, the way the ADA works is very wait and see, right? We wait for a disabled person to make a complaint, and then we do and then we may fix it. But I would say that I would say that that's still there. And I'm not sharing that to say that we haven't made a lot of improvements, but I think that there is a group of people that just think that rest on their laurels of we have an ADA, so we're better than we were. And I would say, I'm not, I guess depending on the day, because I experience a lot of things that, people are like, of course you could get in this restaurant. There's the ADA, and then you go and you can't, right? So I think,
Yeah.
it's actually not really surprising to me. Yeah, and then people are right. One example, no access in the chat. I mean, if we listed all the places just in San Diego that we don't have access to, and a lot of times the burden falls on the disabled people to make to follow through. But like, if I just want to go to a store for a taco, I don't have the energy to make a complaint or do that all the time. So I think it's also important for parents and support, folks that are in the supporter role to acknowledge their privilege and support us in making those. Acknowledging that the ADA in itself isn't perfect, and like a lot of people will text me to let me know that an elevator's broken. It's like, thank you, but can you also support in maybe figuring out, like, in getting it fixed, right? It's very nice that you're telling me just in case I go to that building, but when they're telling me, it very much feels like they're telling me for me to do something. And I do think that certainly disabled people should be leading those conversations and involved, but we can't address it alone, right? Like,
Do they think that you have a speed dial connection to the elevator? I mean, I'm just like sitting there going, that doesn't help, but go ahead.
I think that they think that I will be outraged, because if you know me, you know that I will give you the outraged response. But I do think it's some of that. I do think it's like, I've heard people, people have texted me and said, Toni, I know you could get this done, which is a wonderful compliment, but there's a lot of things to do. And so I don't have the energy. And so I'm not sharing that to say like disabled people shouldn't do anything. Of course, we should be involved. But I think that sometimes parents also need to see their role as chipping away at the systemic barriers. I think so many times the parental role is so focused on the individual, we never move outside of that. And so I think it's important to think about that.
Sorry, I came in late. I apologize. I actually I had it so much on my mind, then at the last minute I forgot to start doing things outside around the house. I'm so sorry. I really apologize, and I'm sorry that I missed it for myself too. But as far as like, I'm not sure if I'm out of order here, but as far as the ADA is concerned, I'm not sure why until now we don't have a building code like we have with every other safety issue or every other building code. Why isn't there a code that requires every single building to be totally ADA? I mean, I studied architecture for 4 years, and I don't see why at UC Berkeley, and I don't see why we cannot design with accessibility in mind and still be creative and still be efficient and still be accessible to everybody, you know?
So here's what I know about that is that there is law that says that all these places should be, but there's no enforcement mechanism. It's on individual people to go and make a complaint or file a lawsuit, which if you've ever filed the lawsuit, you know how difficult that is, how onerous that is, how much energy that takes. So it's really, I think there's no enforcement.
maybe to approach the AIA, the American Institute of Architects would be another one, and American Institute of Planners. Also, that might be more amenable to do changes among their membership rather than just go from the, since
Yeah.
the work with the state doesn't, or the government doesn't work.
I do think there are folks within architecture who are doing this kind of work, but yeah, it takes a lot to make these systems wide changes. But universal design came from architecture. And so I think that was long before the ADA even passed that they were thinking about this, but it's just not widespread enough.
I mean, the USGBS, the US Green Building Council, USGBC, is another place I think maybe we should work on, because they're changing everything. They're making buildings green. So why can't we make buildings accessible too? Since
Yeah.
we're changing everything in the building, from the doormat to the doorknob to the faucet, you know?
Yeah, I also think though, like the ADA, it's important to recognize that it's the bare minimum, right? And also, like accessibility doesn't guarantee that it's usable or equitable. I've been in a lot of situations where I'm in the accessible restroom, I'm in the accessible building, and it doesn't mean it's usable. And I hear people repeating back, we followed the ADA, but remember there's a lot of gray area there. So I think usability also comes into play. So I often hear people say, like, let's use a really concrete example. So an accessible restroom that might be designed really well by the ADA for a wheelchair user can be a nightmare for a little person, right? And those are the same guidelines. So it's important to think about usability as well.
Yeah.
And I think I see some things in the chat here, and from Allison says, and the ADA is silent, save for the deaf and hard of hearing, on ways to accommodate those who communicate differently or have different levels of cognition, right? So yeah, even understanding, and I think we have a lot of misinformation out on the ADA as well, which then perpetuates a lack of enforcement.
That
So-
was one of the points. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Joyce. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I can think of a school where the ramp, you would probably have to be a ninja warrior athlete to navigate it in a wheelchair, because it's got like, it's deep, it goes around and around and around. And so it's true, yet it does somehow meet the code, but it doesn't necessarily mean usability, is really there.
Yeah, thanks. So I see that we have about 5 minutes left. So I want to just ask Jen if you want to kind of give any takeaways, or things that, or if you want to give, a snippet to encourage folks to buy your book and read your book. I'm going to paste the link to, if you want to purchase the book on Amazon, I'm going to paste it in the chat.
Yeah, and the book is available as a hardcover and in paperback. Unfortunately, I haven't come up with an audiobook yet, but if you have a Kindle or Alexa, it will read it to you, which is okay. But thank you so much. I mean, I think the biggest takeaway is really understanding that disability isn't necessarily about everything you see in the media. It's really more about the lived experience, understanding that people with disabilities have value, they're capable, and to really get some bigger expectations involved there as well.
Yeah, if I could add in, I just want to say valuable as they are. I think I
Yeah.
watch a lot of people try to mask disabled people, like, or get uncomfortable if somebody's asking a long-winded question or somebody needs longer to communicate. So valuable as they are. And we as a society need to be more flexible and prioritize other ways of being, right? And not have to have disabled people apologizing for their very existence. And so valuable as they are.
Yeah, and also I think understanding that disability is a slice of somebody's identity. You know, yes, disability takes up space in a lot of other parts of identity, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the entire picture of someone.
Those are two really awesome points to kind of like leave us like processing, really, is, you know, that this is one part and valuable as they are. I think if we like kind of leave just trying to reflect on that as we move forward. And any last thoughts from any of the audience? I want to give a little, however you can communicate your appreciation for our author. Yay. I did try to put in chat as we've drawn book. So again, if you happen to be listening to this, My Unexpected Life, subtitle Finding Balance Beyond My Diagnosis, by Jennifer Gasner. It is available in hardcover and paperback at your local retailer or Amazon. And we're just so pleased that you would join us for Disability Pride Month in our very inaugural celebration. So thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you,
one
Toni.
way to center the lived experience and to promote authentic narratives is to share about Jen's book, to get it out there. I think, you know, disabled people have we have to get out there, and so share about the book, buy it, support it, follow Jen on social media. She has a great website.
Review it.
Oh,
Review the book.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The reviews help to get more people to access the material.
Yeah.
My side job is Jen's publicist. No, I'm just kidding. Joking.
That pretty much is, yeah.
Joking, but please review the book. And Jen also writes great short blog posts. So if you're interested in hearing more of Jen's perspective, please check out her website. I'm gonna fumble at doing it at a good speed, but I can quickly put it in the chat.
And I was going to say, Jen, did you want to say what is your Instagram handle?
Oh, it's Jenny G. Writer, WRITER. And I'm on Facebook at Jennifer Gasner Author, and also LinkedIn at Jennifer Gasner. And I appreciate you so much. This was great.
And I pasted the link to her website. All forms of support is great to support authentic narratives of disabled people. And I thank you so much to EFRC for making this possible. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Good night, everyone.
Night. Thank you.